our program tonight with Shetan Noir, Mothman, and other flying creatures of the Midwest. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to chat with me personally, but I will hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm guessing that everybody's having weather of different sorts. So up here in Michigan, it's going from thunderstorms to hot and muggy out. So hopefully everybody will be able to watch Wi-Fi because of the storms. So I want to introduce my investigator. I am a cryptozoologist. I am at GQ Magazines, and we have several different titles. We have Squatch GQ, we have Squatch Digest, which are cryptozoology based, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Wendigos, Dogman, all that good stuff. That's what we feature interviews and articles about in those two magazines. And then we have Ghost and Paranormal, and that magazine is called G Hunters, and you will see interviews is pretty much everything. And then we have a couple of other titles. We have Backwoods Magazines. So if you are a fan of the TV show Terror in the Woods, this is a magazine that we feature people's real life encounters with different scenarios like the paranormal, monsters, UFOs. They submit their personal accounts to us, and then we publish them in the magazine Backwoods. We also have two new titles this year. One is Dinosauria and Prehistoric Creatures, and the very first issue that's coming out next month is dedicated to prehistoric sharks. So if you're a fan of the megalodon, of the Helicoporian, which is the buzz-toothed shark, of Stephacanthus, of any of the prehistoric sharks. I have over 14 different interviews with paleontologists whose expertise is prehistoric sharks and are very specialized in different shark species. So if you love sharks, that's definitely an issue to check out. And then our final new magazine that's coming out is one called Weird Travels. And that is where I travel around to different places and investigate and do research on them. And one of my responsibilities as a writer, as a journalist, is if I'm going to write about a place, I need to actually visit it firsthand, because I want to make sure that, one, the location exists, two, it's safe for people to go to and have public access to, and three, that the reports and at least some of the claims are actually true and actually are associated with the location. So again, that magazine's called Weird Travels. I am also the Michigan lead investigator for the North American Dogman Project. So up here in Michigan, we have a lot of Dogman reports, particularly on the west side of the state near Ludington. But we're starting to get more and more reports going out into other areas. And it's not just Bigfoot that people are reporting seeing anymore. Now they're reporting a canine. So that's part of my responsibilities as an investigator, is going out and investigating Dogman reports here in Michigan. I also teach at two different community colleges. One here in Michigan, that is Kellogg Community College. I teach at the Battle Creek and Hastings campus. And I teach two courses, the paranormal history of the Great Lakes and cryptozoology of North America. I also teach in Perrysburg, Ohio at Owens Community College. And depending on which semester term it is, I'll either be teaching paranormal history of the Great Lakes or cryptozoology of North America. I do believe we have a course starting this fall for paranormal history of the Great Lakes. So if you're interested, and Perrysburg, Ohio isn't too far away from you, definitely check it out. Very nice facility, very modern, and the classes are during the evening and they're in person. So if anybody has an interest in the paranormal history of the Great Lakes or cryptozoology, feel free to check out what I offer at Owens Community College. Now, on to our subject of tonight. So, Mothman and other flying creatures of the Midwest. I really like to focus on regional territories for my different cryptid books, because you will find a lot of the same stories and creatures in different regions. So in the Great Lakes area, we have a lot of lake monster reports. So my very first book was Lake Monsters and Odd Creatures of the Great Lakes. And this covered, not only the Great Lakes, but actually inland lakes where there was monster reports. But Mothman, I opened it up more for the Midwest, because in Michigan, we don't really get a whole lot of flying cryptid reports. But West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, these all get a huge amount of cryptid reports. And so I always like to start off in Illinois. And there's two different flying cryptids that I like to talk about. And the first one actually happens in Lawndale, Illinois, in 1977. And for people unfamiliar, this report is our modern day Thunderbird report. And not the Native American Thunderbird, where it's the arch enemy of the underwater panthers and the water monsters, the evil water monsters. This is very much a flesh and blood creature that was able to actually change the whole course of a 10-year-old boy's life. And so the story goes that Marlon Lowe was playing in the yard with two of his friends while his mom and neighbors were finishing up with dinner, and they were going to work on a camper that was kind of noticed off in the distance, two birds that seem to be getting bigger as they're coming closer. And it's not until the birds are within striking distance that the panic really starts in of, these are birds that are much bigger than what they have ever seen before. As a matter of fact, nobody has ever seen any birds like these in Illinois before that or after that. So we don't really know where it came from, but the described them of white feathers around their neck and spear-headed. So this gives us the mental image of a condor or a vulture, which are not very pretty birds, but they serve a function within the natural world. So these birds are getting closer and closer, and his friends panic. One little boy runs and jumps into the pool, holds his breath for as long as he can. The other little boy runs and hides in the bushes. Poor Marlon, he's left out in the open. And it's at this point that the bigger of the two birds starts to go into a dive and proceeds to scoop up Marlon. At the time, he was wearing a tight-fitting tank top, and the bird's claws actually hooked into the straps of the tank top and started to lift him off the ground. Now, this is a 10-year-old child who weighs, I'm going to guess between 45 to 60 pounds. And it proceeds to pick him up and is starting to carry him off. And it actually carries him for what might not seem like a long distance, but if you're being carried off by a predatory bird, 30 feet is 30 feet. So at this point, he's yelling, he's screaming. His mom comes, to the rescue. Marlon is hitting at the bird's legs, at its claws. The mom is frantically trying to, engage the bird and make it drop. Her son finally, he hits the bird's legs just right, and it drops him. And so he falls to the ground, and the birds proceed to fly off. But this isn't the end of the sighting of the birds, because up to 2 weeks afterwards, people are claiming to see these two large birds We don't know if they were a mated pair or if it was a mother with a young offspring who was, learning from her. All we do know is that there was two of them, and they are spotted in the Lawndale area for up to 2 weeks afterwards before they leave the area completely, and they're never seen again. But this was so traumatic for Marlon and his mom, Ruth Lowe, that he was never the same again. And for years afterwards, people would harass them because they thought that the story was made up until the documentation of other people eyewitnessing these birds, within that 2 week time period started to come out. And then, people started to believe in it more and more. But by this time, the psychological damage, the post-traumatic stress disorder had already set in for Marlon, and he was never really the same ever again. So we don't know where these two gigantic birds came from. A bird that can carry off a 60-pound child has to have quite a large wingspan, because birds themselves don't really weigh a whole lot, and their ability to lift off the ground really depends on how much updraft they can get as they are flapping their wings or jumping off of a tree branch or a cliff and catching a thermal and being able to glide and get some altitude in that way. So this would have had to have been a bird with at least a 6-foot wingspan, if not more, and a very tall bird at that, to be able to pick up and carry a small, 60-pound child. That is quite a bit of weight. But we do know that golden eagles are well known for killing sheep, killing deer, and picking them up and flying away from, with them. We do know that eagles of any kind can swoop down and grab a 30-pound fish out of a river and fly off with it. So it's not, out of the realms of possibilities that these birds swooped down, and one of them actually grabbed hold of Marlon and lifted him up and flew off, tried to fly off with him. But, a bird with this size proportions, that is kind of a rarity in today's world. And, we can only guess that maybe it came up from South America, Central America, and maybe it was because of destruction of the Amazon forest or the rainforest down there and the loss of habitat and territory, because at this time, that is when the deforestation started happening in South America, which disturbed and disrupted a lot of different species. And the thing about big birds is, as long as they can fly and get off the ground, they can go anywhere in the world that they want, as long as they have opportunities to eat and drink and rest at some point. There's really no barriers for a bird, especially if it has a long, a large wingspan and, can travel. So we really don't know what, species this could have been. The description of it, you can guess that it was maybe a vulture or a condor. We do know that in the South America region, there was a species of territorn bird that was enormous, and it was called Argentinus or Argentavus magnificent. And so imagine a raven with a 6-meter wingspan. And that would be a pretty good visual description of what this bird looked like. So we don't know if it was possibly a surviving, a couple of members of the species that were tucked away in little pockets, around the rainforest, or if they came from somewhere else. So my next report out of Illinois is actually from Alton, Illinois. And if you've ever been to Alton, you probably know the bird that I'm going to, talk about, or flying cryptid that I'm going to talk about, because it's really much, it is very much what I call a small town monster. And these are monster reports that the town has, embraced and made it part of their culture, made it, part of their tourism, has really, really brought it into every aspect of their town. And in Alton, Illinois, they definitely did, because there is a huge painting on the sandstone bluffs as you are exiting out of Alton, Illinois, and going towards the Missouri side. And it is dimension wise, you have to see it to understand how big it is, because it's flat, it's on a flat surface, but it's about 20 feet up in the air, and it measures at least 40 feet long by, I want to say, a good 20 feet high, from the bottom of it where the painting begins up to the top. And it is a depiction of what they believe is the Piazza Bird. Now, I've heard it pronounced a couple of different ways, but Piazza Bird is the way that I'm going to pronounce it, and it's Piasa. Now, the legend behind this is actually reported and documented by two different figures. One is the Jesuit priest, Jacques Marquette. Marquette, Michigan's named after him. He was traveling around the Great Lakes area with some fur traders, particularly Juliet. And that's where Juliet, Illinois gets his name, Louis Juliet. He was traveling around with these fur traders, and he was collecting the different Native American stories and preserving them. But some historians, some Native American storytellers think that he got things mixed up, because the description of the Piazza Bird is very similar to the great underwater panther of Lake Superior in Abishu. Both of them, they feature a lot of the same details, including a head like a, moose or horse with, a rack of horns on it, really grotesque wings, spikes going down its back, a long tail that wraps around its body and over its head that ends in spikes, and a almost lionish type body, but with scales on it. And so, we have this image of both creatures that, one's flying in the air, one's swimming underneath the water. So there's some details that just don't fit with each one. But this is what we have from Jacques Marquette's description of what he wrote down. Now, the Native American meaning supposedly of the Piazza Bird is the devourer of men. And it said that according to legend, the only way to stop this monstrous bird, flying cryptids, reign of terror was the chief offered himself up as the target. And what he did was he had his warrior braves hide along the cliffs of the sides of the river with their bows, with their arrows, with their spears. And he stood out on a rock outcropping and made himself known to the creature, which then flew towards him. And as it was about to attack, that's when all the warriors unleashed their arrows, unleashed their spears, and were able to mortally wound the Piazza Bird. And so it stopped attacking people on the river, people on the mountains after that. So we do have, this really interesting story of the Piazza Bird. If you're ever in Alton, Illinois, I recommend checking it out, because they have depictions of the bird on all of their street signs. There's plaques around town. Even the gas stations have a mural painted of it, depending on what area of the city you're coming in from. But definitely check out the Sandcliff Bluff, because they they have repainted it several times, touching it up over the years. So the colors are still very, very vibrant. And the Chamber of Commerce really does a excellent job of preserving it. But there is a chain link fence that comes out about 20 feet in a curve in front of the petroglyph. I guess we'll call it a petroglyph, because apparently people try to climb the sandstone cliff, which is not a very good idea because it will crumble underneath your fingertips. And you're not going to get very high up before it just collapses from underneath you and slides you back down. And if you're, a couple of, feet up in the air, it's not bad. But if you're like 10 feet up in the air and come sliding back down, you're probably going to get hurt. So they do have it protected. But definitely go check out Alton, Illinois, and the Piazza Bird. It's really cool, and I found it interesting, so I hope other people find it interesting too. So now we're going to move over to Indiana, and Indiana is where I got my first eyewitness report, where somebody actually sought me out at a convention that I was at down there because they wanted to tell me their story. And it was very interesting because it was at an outdoor paranormal event in the summer. And we didn't think we were going to get a whole lot of people, but, we ended up getting different crowds at different point. But eventually this gentleman is directed towards my booth. And he's introduced to me, and, they're like, well, here's the person to tell your story to. And so I'm like, oh, okay. I'm assuming dog man, but I'm going to leave it up to him. And he said, well, my friends and I, when we were younger, we would go hunting for, bullfrogs, for frog legs. And I'm like, okay. And he said, well, there was this one particular swamp that we knew that there was a good population of bullfrogs at, and we would go there. And he said, and on this particular night, it was, a foggy, summer night. It was humid, it was yucky. He said, but, this was the best time to find, bullfrogs for us. And so they were, quietly making their way, up to the swamp and walking through the waters. And he said, what we heard was, we thought a flock of geese had come in, because we couldn't believe that, one bird was making that much noise with its wings. And, we did hear it land in the water, and it made a splash sound as it was, walking through the water. We were assuming that it was doing the same thing. We were hunting for, bullfrogs or fish or whatever. But it seemed to be, moving back and forth, not that far from us. And he said at one point, my friend just couldn't take it anymore and had to know what was making so much noise. So he flicked on his lantern real quick, and that startled the bird. And we saw this humongous, leathery skinned creature just like spring up out of the water, and a couple of flaps of its wings, and it was sailing off. He said, but it didn't look like any bird we had seen before. And so he starts describing to me what is essentially a pterosaur, flying reptile. A lot of people say pterodactyl, but in North America, we have over 140 different species of pterodactyl, ranging from the size of a sparrow all the way up to Quetzalcoatlus Naropa, who had the wingspan of a Cessna airplane. So about 40 feet. Imagine a pelican with a 40-foot wingspan and without feathers, and you basically have Quetzalcoatl. So we had these huge pterosaurs, and what he's describing to me is, he's like, it wasn't a bat, it wasn't a crane of any kind, it wasn't a herring. He said, I've seen those, this was not it. He said it didn't have any feathers, had a very leathery appearance to its wings and its body. And he said it only took one burst for it to raise up out of the water and a couple of flaps of its wings, and it was in the sky and flying away. And to this day, him and his buddies won't go out hunting for frogs anymore because they don't want to deal with anything like that in the swamps. So another very interesting, eyewitness report where, and I don't believe the gentleman was lying because he had no reason to. He came, he freely gave me his report. He wanted to make sure I had it and could document it because he was interested to see if there was any other accounts in the Indiana area of a creature like this. Now, this was close to Gary, Indiana, which is borderline, Illinois, depending on the water. You're right there on the Indiana-Illinois border with Gary, Indiana. So it could definitely have the Great Lakes as its territory and just be a nocturnal creature that it warms itself during the day with the sunlight and then hunts at night. And then when the cooler temperatures of the season come, probably flies down south and, has a territory down there. A lot of people don't understand that with birds. They're very migratory and they follow the thermals, they follow the weather, they follow the food sources. And when the weather starts to change in the north, that sends them down south. And when it starts getting too hot down south, then they come back north. There's only a few, species that actually stay year round in cold weather. And they tend to be the smaller little birds, like your cardinals, your sparrows, your nuthatches, stuff like that. Things that, you look out the window and you see every day. Definitely not a pterodactyl of any kind. Those, I'm pretty sure are pretty, if they're still in existence, they've become very good at avoiding humans because humans, they've learned are, top predators. We also have a flying, it's hard to describe him as a man bat or a lizard man, but I've seen reports of both up in the Wisconsin area of a creature with a wingspan that was wide enough to cover both lanes of a two-lane road. Gentleman was traveling down the road and happened to see this very large creature out in the field. And he thought, well, I'm going to pull over. I'm going to sneak through, the weeds, try to get as close to this creature as I can and take a picture of it. Unfortunately, he only got, maybe 10 feet into the field and the creature realized he was there and flew up into the air and started circling the field. And the gentleman thought, well, it's probably a good thing if I get back into my truck. Less likely, chance to be a meal that way. So as he was driving down the road away from it, the creature was actually soaring above his truck and then soared past his truck, and he could see that the wings extended from one side of the road to the other side of the road, with its body being directly in the middle. And it had a wingspan of, a two-lane road. So that's quite a big wingspan. Definitely a very big, creature. He said it kind of matched its surrounding. And if you've ever seen a sandhill crane, they do a very good job of blending in. They are that weird, tawny gray / reddish brown mix of colors. I'd even say there's some green in there, depending on what season of the year it is. And so, we have that report coming from Wisconsin, but we also have a flying lizard man creature that a man and his son saw. Now, the only difference with this creature is after the initial eyewitness sighting, both the man and his son were so in shock that he immediately hit the brakes on his vehicle, put it in park. The creature was gone, and they both got out, and they were nauseous for a long time afterwards. And they don't know if it was something to do with the creature itself, or just the shock and fear of seeing it made them that nauseous. But they both experienced this, and it took them quite a while, and came across, this creature and spooked it. And so apparently it decided to spook them back, and actually was diving at their truck and making them fear for their lives before it flew off and disappeared. So some interesting reports coming out of Wisconsin. Now I'll move over to Ohio, because we do have a creature that I do think it is a migratory species, and I believe it goes from Pennsylvania to Ohio to West Virginia and then back into Pennsylvania. Now, the name that this creature has in Ohio is the Freedom Township demon. And there's been a couple of different reports. One saying that it looked like a large dragon. This is kind of unconfirmed because it could have been somebody with one of those very elaborate kites. If you've ever seen some of these kite festivals at beaches, they have some very, very cool, elaborate kites that are enormous. There's one of an octopus that is just stunning. It literally looks like this thing's alive and floating through the sky. So, I can't rule out that it wasn't somebody with a dragon type kite that was very realistic looking and in the shape of a dragon. But the one that I usually focus on is one that ties in with the other reports that I've received, and that is of a gargoyle type creature that people normally see alongside the road or in openings in fields. And the weird thing is it stays stationary until the vehicles are passing it, and then it'll do something like it'll move its wings, or it'll tilt its head or move its head, letting you know that it's actually real. And then it will launch up out of the ground and is gone. There's a couple different reports of this from Freedom Township, Ohio. But there's the same creature that is in Pennsylvania around the Butler County area, and it's called the Chikara gargoyle. And I actually got an eyewitness report on this creature. Now, once again, I had a gentleman come up to me who didn't even know I was writing a book on flying cryptids. And I was at this paranormal conference, and I was talking about different cryptids, small town monster cryptids that were in Pennsylvania. And I had mentioned the Chikara gargoyle of Butler County. And so after I got off stage and was back at my booth, the gentleman approached me. He said, "I'm so glad you talked about the gargoyle." And I said, "Oh yeah, isn't that cool?" And he's like, "Well, it's cool until you see it in person." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Do you know someone?" He said, "I am the someone." I said, "Oh, awesome." And I said, only got an hour before the event's over, and I need to start, packing up my stuff. Here's my email, drawings or anything you have. And he said, "Absolutely." So as I was making the 9-hour drive home that night, he was writing up his personal experience and sending it to me, and which I have in my Mothman book now, Mothman and Other Flying Creatures of the Midwest. And I won't tell you his story word for word, but I will give you the most interesting points of it. This gentleman was going to visit a friend, and he was driving down an old country road to get there. And he comes up on a house, and he sees in the front yard what he thinks is the coolest Halloween decoration he has ever seen. It has to be at least a 7-foot tall, couple thousand-pound concrete gargoyle. He's like, man, that is really detailed. That is really cool. They probably spent some money on that. And he's like, that is really, really awesome. And as he's driving past it, and he's, getting the full details of it, the head starts to turn and watch him. He's like, oh, that's a really, really cool Halloween decoration. If it can follow, but it's as he gets past of it and he's like looking in his rearview mirror to see if it does anything else. He's like, oh man, the wings move on it. That's really cool. And then he's like, and he's looking in his rearview mirror and he's like, it disappears. So at this point, now he's freaked out. So he hits the gas, he's accelerating, he gets to his friend's house, spends the night there, but curiosity gets the better of him. So he decides to take that exact same route as he goes, back home the next morning. So he knows exactly where the location is. He gets back to the house and he's realizing, the house kind of looks dated, like maybe it's been a while since somebody's been there, or at least somebody doesn't take real good care of it, because there's weeds growing in the lawn. The windows don't look too clean. Screen looks a little bit torn up. But the most interesting thing is there is no gargoyle statue in the front yard. And he actually, stops his car. He doesn't get out. He stops his car, rolls down the windows, and he's observing this. And there's several key details. For one, there is no dead grass at the base of where the statue would have been. There's also no drag marks of any tires or anything, way that they moved this gargoyle from that location. And so now he's putting 2 and 2 together, and he realizes, I'm pretty sure that was the Butler County gargoyle that I saw, and that was no Halloween decoration. And so ever since then, he has been on the lookout for this creature because he knows it exists, and he's kind of on the fence of whether he ever wants to actually see it again, because maybe that wouldn't be a good thing, especially if it recognizes him and realizes that he knows what it is. So like I said, it was very, very cool to actually talk to this gentleman and get his eyewitness report of this creature, and be able to document it of his whole experience of dealing with this creature. So we've still got time. I can talk about the one that probably everybody came to see and hear about tonight, and that is the West Virginia Mothman. I'm not sure where everybody's located from, but if you're in Southern Ohio, you're probably very close to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the area that had the most activity with, or we shall say reported activity with the West Virginia Mothman. But the thing about it is most people think that these reports started in 1966. And actually, they started a while before that. But it was the people in the rural communities that were reporting odd happenings. Like they were seeing glowing eyes in the woods, hearing growling, coming, out of different areas. The farmers would go to bed at night with, 10 calves out in the field and get up the next morning and there was 8. And no signs of wolves or bear or mountain lion or anything dragging them off, just gone. Got to be to the point where most families, as soon as it started getting dark, they were in the house locking up every door, every window, and nobody would go out until the sun was up the next day, because they were, starting to acknowledge that there was a presence in these rural communities that was unnatural, and nobody in the cities wanted to take them seriously until people closer to the city started having sightings. Now, the sightings in the rural communities started about 2 years before stuff started happening in the city. And actually, the reports kind of were dismissed until 4 teenagers were out cruising around, decided that they would go out to the TNT area, which if you ever get down to West Virginia for the Mothman festival, definitely go on the tour. It's in an air-conditioned bus. It's fabulous, especially if you've been walking around the Mothman festival all day in 90-degree weather or 88-degree weather in the baking sun. That air-conditioned bus sitting down, oh, it's fabulous. Take a cold drink with you. It's fantastic. But they will take you out to the TNT bunkers, and you can actually go inside one and take pictures. Lots of interesting graffiti on the inside. They do clean it up, before the festival, because obviously teenagers, adventurers, adults, go out there to investigate and see what they can find. So I like to go with the group and do the tour thing. But these 4 teenagers were out in the TNT area and doing what teenagers do, obviously looking for a hideaway spot to, have some fun. But they never actually get close to the TNT center, because as they are pulling down the dirt road to go to the bunkers, they see a weird creature standing alongside the road. So this immediately freaks them out, and they panic, decide we're going to get away from this creature. So as they're trying to get back out onto the main road, they are realizing that this flying creature, the Mothman, is over top of their car. Now, a description of the wingspan. So this is 1960s. We're all, familiar with, the style and the size of a 1960s car. Basically a boat on wheels, takes up the whole lane of the road. So the interesting description that we get from these 4 teenagers, the eyewitnesses, is that the wings were so long that when it flapped down with its wings, the tip of its wings was smacking, literally smacking, both sides of the driver's side and passenger side front doors. So every few seconds, bam, it's getting smacked. And of course, they're panicking. They are freaking out. So the creature proceeds to chase them up to a mile outside of town. And the first, business, other people that they come across, is actually a restaurant. It's now a pizzeria that one of the boys worked at. So they go in there. They are totally traumatized. They are panicking, shaking. And so the owner, the boss of the boy, asked him, what's going on? What's going on? You guys are acting, crazy. What's going on? So they tell him, they tell him exactly what happened, and he believes them. So he calls the police, has the police come out, and they do a report. And this is what starts our closer to civilization reports of the Mothman, which then brings some other odd, instances with it, where you got the Men in Black showing up. People are wondering, is this a hybrid creature that the TNT, bunkers, mutated and, caused this creature to go weird? Is it a government experiment? Is it an alien? And so you've got people who want to go out and investigate, but the local authorities and the local government, in order to avoid a panic, are telling people stay at home. We don't need your help looking for this creature. We have everything under control. Um, and people are reporting more and more sightings, and it's becoming if you haven't seen the Mothman, you're kind of the oddball out of the group. Now, a lot of people think that this comes to an end with the collapse of the Silver Bridge in December of 1967. It did, it there was reports from different people they said that a bat-like Mothman creature was flying back and forth from one part of the bridge to another. And there are people who will defend it and say, no, it was warning people that an accident was about to happen. But there's other people who say, no, we were there. We know what it did. It wasn't giving a warning. It was causing the problem. The facts and science of it is there was way too many cars on that bridge that night. It was December. There was also ice on the bridge. For every quarter of ice that's covering a surface, it puts that much more weight. And so an inch of ice over a bridge, that's a lot of weight. We do know that the support beams weren't exactly made for this type of weight, and that the structure of that bridge, engineering wise, this was the only bridge built like that in existence and had never been tested for heavy weights. So you can imagine a line of cars going in both directions, lining the bridge because the lights were out. And unfortunately, people were stuck on the bridge when it collapsed, and there was a great casualty of life. So there's different ways of looking at it. People still to this day claim that there was the Mothman flying back and forth around the bridge, and that it caused the catastrophe. Whether it did or not, we won't actually ever know. Nobody's been able to catch the Mothman and actually try to communicate with it, try to study it. All we have is eyewitness reports and newspaper clippings of that time period, to examine, to evaluate. And the more years that pass, the older eyewitnesses become, the less there are of them. So it really becomes hard to manufacture the truth out of the stories. So we will never know what the Mothman's intent was with the Silver Bridge, whether he was trying to destroy it or whether he was trying to warn people to get off the bridge. Obviously, the people who were trapped in their cars couldn't go backwards or forwards because it was literally a row of cars going one direction and a row of cars going the next direction on a two-lane bridge. So they were pretty much stuck on there. I guess they could have gotten out of their cars and made a run for it. But I'm assuming, the reality of the situation didn't hit until it was unavoidable. So, really, we have this casualty of life associated with this legend, but we don't really know if the legend, if the creature, the Mothman, was part of it. Now, if you are going down to West Virginia, Point Pleasant, or Sutton, West Virginia, there are lots of cool, interesting things. There's the Mothman Museum down in West Point, or Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There's the Mothman statue. Every the third Saturday of September every year is the Mothman Festival, which is free to attend. They always bring in speakers around the country who are different cryptozoologists and paranormal investigators, and they give presentations on different stuff. So that's definitely worth checking out. And if you're down in West Virginia anyways, go a little ways, west to Sutton, West Virginia, and check out the Flatwood Monsters. There's a small little town. They do have a little museum, and there's a cafe that has all the newspaper clippings, and there's a path that you can follow around town where all the tourist, stuff is for the Flatwood Monster, including these big cutout chairs that you can sit in, and Flatwood Monster murals. So it's definitely worth checking out. Just make sure you like driving in the mountains, because West Virginia has lots and lots of curves and mountains, and it's not for the faint of heart. So does anybody have any questions?
And I had a question actually for you.
Sure.
How did you get started on your interest in this subject? So what got you interested in
Well,
cryptids?
So with cryptids, my interest began when I was a young child, and our family vacations were always camping. And this particular summer that this happened, my family was, the campground was called Crystal Lake, and very clear water. Interesting thing about this campground was they had an alligator in a dog kennel there, like a 10 by 5 dog kennel. So to a 9-year-old child's mind, if there's an alligator in the pen, then there must be alligators out in the lake. So I didn't want to go out fishing. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't even want to look over the side of the rowboat, even though the water was crystal clear, because I'm like, at some point, a big alligator is going to come launching up out of the water, and that's it. But on one particular weekend, they decided it would be a great idea to show for family movie night the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film and The Legend of Boggy Creek. Which, if you've seen any of the, either one of those, Legend of Boggy Creek is a lot scarier, particularly when the creature reaches in through the window to grab at them. And so I remember watching these wide-eyed and like, oh crap, those exist. Being escorted me back to our camper, and it was after that I was like, yep, there's monsters out there. Thanks for telling me, So that's what started my interest in cryptozoology.
Awesome. Well, we have a question in the chat here. Do you think Mothman is a physical being or something more spiritual?
So I think Mothman is interdimensional, meaning he can move between places, but when he's here on our planet, he is very much physical and has an actual body. I believe he goes through portals in different dimensions to get to us. And I don't think that there's just one. I think there's actually multiples, because the Mothman phenomenon is not just associated with Point Pleasant. It's been reported all over the world. And so there's got to be more than one of them that is going around, these different locations, that people are seeing.
Awesome.
I saw a couple other questions pop up, but I couldn't read them.
The next question is, did Lake Placid scare you after that?
Lake Placid, no, because by then I was an adult, and it wasn't, that was more, oh yeah, I know that, alligators can exist in cold temperatures as long as their nostrils don't freeze. But there again, I always, research the bodies of water that I go into before I go into them, because I want to make sure I know what the thing in that lake is. So Lake Placid didn't scare me. I watched, Bigfoot movies, and seeing an alligator in the north, here in Michigan, northern Michigan actually, and it's like, I thought those just lived down south, and nope, they must have them in the lakes here if they have one in the pen. So that nine-year-old child mentality.
That makes sense. And so we have one other question here right now. Any advice for someone who might be interested in pursuing cryptozoology because their daughter seems to be interested?
So what I will recommend is Start out with reading as much as you can about natural occurring species, on Earth today. Follow that up by a very, very good understanding of dinosaurs, prehistoric creatures, prehistoric marine reptiles, prehistoric flying reptiles, because you will get lots of reports of things that are dinosaur-like. And you need to know the difference between an Allosaurus and a T-Rex, the difference between a plesiosaur and a mosasaur and an ichthyosaur, the difference between a quetzalcoatl and a terror bird, which is actually like a giant, very angry looking ostrich. Don't want to. So you need to know these differences, but you also need to know animal behavior. You need to understand the reason why a grizzly bear will beat the crap out of you and kill you if you even look, cross-eyed at its cubs. And a black bear will, say, hey, go up the tree, fend for yourself, I'm out of here. So you need to know these things. You need to understand pack mentality of why a wolf pack hunts the way that it does compared to a group of dogs that's hunting. So you need to know animal behavior. You need to know biology. And a crash course in forensic science helps too, because if you're going to do evidence collecting, you have to know that a pair of rubber gloves and some tweezers and a couple of plastic or envelopes and a couple of paper, envelopes, those can be the difference between collecting really good evidence and having compromised, contaminated evidence that has human DNA coded over it.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of good advice I wouldn't have expected. But it makes sense that you'd have to research like known existing things before you get into unknown
Does
existing
anybody else have any
things.
questions?
But yeah, we don't have any other questions in the chat. The person who asked that question has said thank you, that it was great advice. And we also have a great job here. But I'm not seeing any other questions coming through at the moment.
Okay.
And we have reached our 7 o'clock. So if no one else has any other questions, thank you so much for giving the presentation. It was so interesting.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone who came and participated. I hope you enjoyed it, because we certainly did here. And we have a couple other really cool stuff coming, presentations coming up here at the library. So feel free to visit our website, clermontlibrary.org, to sign up for any of those. Some of them are going to start being in person again. And thank you so much for coming. I think that will end the presentation here tonight.